Good afternoon, members of the task force. Today's a working meeting. We're just going to try to craft our ideas that we have consensus on and figuring out how we write this report for hopefully a vote at next meeting. And I should say for the TV people, Representative Mary Mashinsky, co-chair. And my co-chair may want to say hello.
Good afternoon. Yeah, Representative Mark Anderson. I know we've come a long way in just a few months. I appreciate this is a large working group with, I guess, 24 voting members. Everyone's input is important, and we've heard from a lot of people and some not so much. So the ones we haven't heard from much, now is the time to raise your hand, and we'll get your input, especially since we have some draft language we'll get to later. So looking forward to the meeting today.
So going through this, think about what would be a legislative recommendation for a bill that we could do some repairs this coming session, and what would have to be done by regulation at DEEP. So if we could think about two different categories. We used to do this at program review and investigations and have one pile of suggestions that were regulation and one pile that were intended for writing a bill. So if you could think in those terms as we go through. First, the review of riparian buffer protections in other states, which was done by Office of Legislative Research. Everyone, I think, took a look at that. Do you have any issues with the report, or can we just refer to the report as it's written? Is the group content with the OLR report? You're good? Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the report, but I think the details of the report were a little bit lacking. So there were specific things like, I think in New York, there were exemptions for driveways and certain other features. I think those things are missing from the report. And so I think we need to include some of that language. Thank you.
Okay. So you would like to include exceptions? Any other changes to the OLR report as it was given to us? Okay, so I think we've done that. That'll go into the report. And the next one that was on our charge was to examine DEEP resources dedicated to inland wetlands and watercourses program. I think it was clear to me that they don't have the resources at present to do full implementation, but Alicia.
Sorry, just on the first point, are we also going to include DEP's analysis of other states along with the OLR report as a companion?
Do we have a written report from them?
I think they submitted the presentation, isn't that correct?
Oh, it's in the presentation.
It's in the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
And can I also, if we could just make a note that in both reports, that one thing that wasn't addressed was specifically whether vegetation, the protection of the vegetational in the riparian areas was not necessarily outlined in either one of the reports. Thank you.
Okay. I forgot to mention that we did find Casey found a couple of presenters for value of riparian buffers compared to engineering solutions. They couldn't come today, but we will get information from them at what may be our last meeting next week. Okay, so the next thing we had to, John Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm John Casey. I'm a land use lawyer with Robinson and Cole, but I'm here on behalf of Connecticut Marine Trades Association. I'm a member of that organization. My practice focuses on land use, especially coastal land use, and I've sort of been a co-member of this along with Bob Petzold. But I'm here today. We just wanted to, I think we're one of the parties who maybe have sort of watched a lot, but not said a lot during this process. It's probably not, it's probably obvious that as marine industry businesses, members of Connecticut Marine Trades are very concerned with any changes to the statutes or regulations that would impact their ability to undertake their businesses, which are by nature water dependent and must be on the shore. They're in these riparian buffers. And as has been stated throughout, none of the other states in New England, when you look at them, they have exceptions. And we just want to make sure that the exceptions for water dependent uses are preserved so that industries that rely on being close to the shore can continue to do so. There's exceptions in the current inland wetlands statutes and the Coastal Management Act, although not as applicable here totally, obviously supports water-dependent businesses. And we just want to make sure that those are preserved, that those considerations are kept everyone's mind as we go forward, and that nothing is done that would create, as it was discussed in past meetings, sort of a one-size-fits-all riparian buffer, that there has to be exceptions going forward. Thank you.
Okay, and Liz Verna? Online?
Hello, Representative Michinski. I just received the comments from Attorney Brooks, and thank you for submitting some suggestions to change the wetlands statute. I was wondering, number one, are we having another meeting December 10th? And number two, considering that one of our tasks is to make sure that any changes we may make are consistent with private property rights, have we considered, and maybe it's not the group that we should bring in, but having someone from the land use division of the Connecticut Bar Association speak to the group about land right issues, property right issues? Has that been considered?
We didn't, but we could. And I believe Attorney Brooks is a member of the land use group. I think she announced that when she was here.
I may have missed that. The other thing that I feel that we never discussed was, I don't think anyone intentionally wants to destroy or ruin watercourses. What I found in my community is the lack of funds for enforcement. The Wetlands Commission, commissions don't have enough resources to enforce things that are already in the statute regarding wetlands, upland review areas. Are we going to address that at all?
We could, if you want to recommend adding that.
I think it's something that we should address, because after reading the wetlands statute, I feel that a lot of the riparian buffers are already protected, and what's happening out there that the enforcement is not happening. You know, are we discussing this issue to add more regulation because what's already on the books is not being enforced? It's a serious question, and I've heard it from many towns that they just don't have the resources.
Okay. I live in the same town you do, and
I know.
my experience is they don't want to protect, especially in the municipal properties, they don't want to protect riparian buffers. They wish to cut them down so they can get views. And they've said that. You know, when I speak to them, they say, well, we're trying to preserve the views.
Oh,
So some of each, perhaps.
that's all.
Okay, but lack of enforcement, you would like that added to the report.
Yes.
Okay, and we have,
And the
That's-
comments from, if someone from the Connecticut Bar Association could speak to our group about private property rights.
okay, Rep. Dubitsky's a member of it also, and he's on this panel.
Oh, he is?
Yep.
Okay.
I know you haven't been coming to all the meetings because he's quite vocal about this
Oh,
issue.
no, I've been at every meeting, actually. I've been to every meeting. And I hope
Okay.
we do have a meeting December 10th.
Yeah, that's a plan. We left one other date open in case we needed it, or if people couldn't make the 10th, but ideally we'd finish on the 10th.
Okay. Thank you for the time.
Home builders. Matt Fitzpatrick.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. So Matt Fitzpatrick with the Connecticut Nursery and Landscape Association. I did just want to second some of the comments earlier. Currently, there are exceptions for certain agricultural uses, including nurseries. It's our hope that we would be able to maintain these exceptions in any new language going forward. For some of the reasons expressed earlier, we do believe that not including those exceptions would potentially constitute a taking for many of our members, and that could have some serious impact on their business and livelihood as well. So we just wanted to make a note that we would like to see those exceptions maintained.
Okay, and if you had the option of over time using best practices to preserve the water quality through an incentive program, would you take that?
I believe that we would consider that certainly. Our industry in particular do try to be stewards for green practices and oftentimes promote especially replantings in wetlands with native plants and pollinators. So I think if we potentially could develop programs to help the industry as well as maintain these riparian zones with native plants, I certainly think we'd consider that.
Okay. The COG is not here unless they're online. Is West COG online?
Yes, Mary, I am here. Yeah, we're here.
When we talked about this last meeting,
Yeah.
I know you have some best practices and some incentive programs for farmers and nurserymen.
Hmm.
It's something we could include in this report.
Yeah. I think that we should differentiate between existing riparian areas that where the natural vegetation has been removed or impaired, and ones where it has not. And so there's the question of what happens going forward and what already has happened as a pre-existing potentially non-conforming use. And for the areas that already have been cleared, we could look at an incentive program. There are various ways to do that. One way that we have suggested is modifying Public Act 490.
Good idea. I actually tried that one year and it did not go, but sometimes you have to do things more than once around here. But 490, we already exist. People are familiar with it, and we could just add another category. And then we will hear from the municipalities, I'm sure, about that. Frank.
Thank you very much. Couple of things. First of all, I have to say the comments that Francis just made regarding pre-existing non-conforming uses, I think is a sensible one. Certainly these people have been used to maintaining their property. We may not like everything about the way they do it, but I think it's sound legal from a legal standpoint. The other thing I wanted to mention has to do with exceptions. So exceptions for agriculture, obviously, driveways, access, docks, marinas, nurseries, utilities, security fencing, fire ponds, forestry, beaches, tree maintenance. Those things I think are also sound management practices, and they don't necessarily destroy the riparian area, but they are necessary facts of life. We have fire departments; they need to be able to access, water supplies, and they certainly pull out of natural water supplies often. That's a common practice, along with the marinas, the beaches, and all of that sort of thing. The next thing I wanted to mention has to do with some of the comments, or in general, the comments that have been made by the last three speakers. And that relates to the legal aspect of this, the takings. Now, in my opinion, Attorney Brooks minimized this, uh, basically saying, well, they almost never win. Well, they almost never win. That might be true, but it costs municipalities and their insurance companies a fortune to fight this because it almost never gets settled out of court. It is almost always going all the way up the ladder to the highest court to get resolved. It is an expense that towns will have to incur if we try to do a no-go buffer and say, okay, you can't use your property in this way or that way. Now, I think there are ways to do this properly. You know, there are tools that we have at our disposal. One that comes to mind is we have what's called compensatory storage for wetlands, right? You can put in a pond, you can do that kind of thing. You're creating a wetland, so to speak, so that you could do other things. Where you could have compensatory riparian areas. It's not outlandish. Maybe there's a case or there's a mechanism that can be established where, say, someone does feel the need to take out a riparian area for whatever reason, and they would pay a fee to do that, that would then go to, say, maybe Hartford or someplace where they need to establish a riparian area. And that money can be used for that purpose. I think there are logical ways to do this that are balanced. And in any regulation that I've ever seen be successful, there is this element of balance. It is not one way or the other. It is not a blanket no-go zone. It is, okay, well, we encourage this. These are kind of the rules, but we understand that every situation is unique. And that's why there are tools like compensatory storage, for example. So I think there are ways to do this without a blanket method. And I think that the taking issues, which were highlighted by the DEP attorney, who did a great job with her presentation, by the way, are extremely real. And we need to be conscious of that. Thank you.
Okay. We also have to be aware of the presentation that talked about the decline in riparian, vegetative riparian areas over time. I don't know if anybody has those numbers on the tip of their tongue, but it was a big drop from 1985 to today, and that weighs on my mind too. That if we can not exclude everyone give everyone an exception, but encourage them with the programs that the COG is using on the west side of the state to come back into the fold, to repair some damage, to add trees, and try to get back to where we were in 1985, if possible. Again, not a mandate, but an incentive program. But I did write this down, and thank you, Frank. Okay, we had Joe Jeremiah. Okay, Joan.
Apologize for that. Joan Nichols, certified forester. I just want to make sure that, and it's been mentioned earlier, that the permitted use of right language, which includes forestry, we don't end up with another section, amending a section of the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act, which then creates ambiguity and contradiction between what we're currently going to pursue versus what's currently in the law. My experience with a lot of the land use laws is that those that are enforce the laws look at the very last thing that was changed, and they don't go back and look at the rest of the law, which then creates ambiguity and contradiction. So I want to make sure that whatever we do, forestry, which is a permitted use of right activity, is left whole in the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Act. And then the last thing, not to diverge into 490, but I happen to be a person that has a reputation for knowing a lot about 490. And there is the open space classification, which is a municipal option, which in my opinion is a very valuable tool for protecting open space and wetland areas, but it's underutilized. And I'll leave that at that. If you ever want to talk about 490, I'm happy to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have Joe Jeremiah.
Thank you. So the last meeting I was trapped at my business. It was too much traffic to get here. And towards the end of it, and I apologize for backing up to that, there was a lot of talk about the farms and what they could do, best practices. Everything's a great idea. Little history of farming, it's gotten better and better and better from 100 years ago to now. There's quite a lot of no-till methods. We're responsible for maintaining close to 2 million acres in the state. We are not the problem. And it just sounded like we were at the end of that meeting. And I don't take insult to that. It's just more of, let's just educate. I've got 12 wells on my farms. 4 of them are not usable for my crops because of what we're putting on our roads. It's a choice the state's making because the economics of it is far better. I don't have that option in my business, nor do the 5,100 other farmers. We have to use our best practices that we've got. In fact, their farms have gotten smaller because of regulation. And some of them have gotten swallowed up by development because they can't farm in that method. And it's just, if we're going to go down that road, and I just feel there's a little bit of emotion there, and I apologize, like this finger pointing at these terrific people that are maintaining all this. They love the land. They love the clean water. We have municipalities dumping our waste, everybody in this room. Nobody craps vanilla ice cream. It's all going into the water. This is the problem. And so if we're going to look at taking away the exemptions on the people that are beautiful stewards of the land, that's insane to me. And I just hope that we're not going down that road.
Let me ask a question.
Sure.
We had, I went to a Kakiwik meeting one time and sat with a person who was telling me about a farm manure pile that was 10 feet from the river.
Mhm.
And every time there was a big rain event, the manure would wash into the river. Do you have an issue with our regulating them to not put the manure right by the river anymore?
I don't think any one of us, and probably not even that farmer, wants manure in the river.
Mhm.
You know, and there's over 5,000 farms. There's maybe 3 dozen herd farms in the state of Connecticut. I love driving by them. I love seeing those cows. I don't want them to go away.
Mhm.
Everybody's been doing a better job than they were doing 10 years ago and 20 years ago. We all have work to do. The biggest work to be done here by this commission should be taking care of our filthy water. And that's happened with the municipalities, what the state's putting on the roads. It's a disgrace. And we're not talking about it.
No,
You know.
municipalities had to obey the law. They had to ratchet up their treatment. I was heavily involved in this, and I remember it. In my community, it's tertiary treatment now because the river is small enough that that's needed. And they really were not happy with that, but they did it. And the water quality has risen. It's noticeable. So they may have been screaming about it, but they did do it. And it's the new problem is the non-point source water that just comes off the landscape. That's the new problem that we are trying to get a handle on.
Understood, but I think if we point to the farmers instead of I'm all about education, and educate us more. We're fine. We're doing it on our own, but we'll take more. You want to throw money at it, we'll do that too, and it'll get better. We don't have a problem with that. It's sort of the finger pointing because the education needs to be on the homeowner. or our overpopulation at times, and how do we handle that? So it just, I don't want to scare more farmers out of this state.
No, no, I'll
that
just go back to my previous comment.
okay.
I'm not trying to remove existing exemptions. What I'm trying to do is not leave them where they are now. I'd like to incentivize them to do more rather than just repeating the exemption from 40 years ago or 50 years ago.
Okay, the exemption's necessary we're barely feeding ourselves now.
I gotcha.
We're growing food, and again, as we're born, it's like a right, all of us are polluting the day we're born.
Okay.
I had 4 kids, and the diaper changes were amazing on day 1, so.
Denise.
Yeah, thank you. So I think there's a good point. I don't think, and a lot of the comments we've had today have been about making sure we don't lose the exemptions that we have. I think we're looking at making something a regulated activity, but that doesn't mean that, so if it's regulated, not changing the exemptions is important, particularly from ag. I would like to say, I think the discussion, because I was part of it, Mary, that you asked at the end of the last meeting, was about, was there a way to provide incentives for farmers, and not necessarily through the regulatory act, but and I pointed to the work that you did last year, that the General Assembly did on a Connecticut Farm Bill, which provided dollars to do some great conservation planning. And I think and that would augment the dollars we get through, for example, USDA and RCS. And so there's ways for us to do that. So I just want to make sure we clarify that I think the discussion about farming was more about providing more dollars and more incentives. It wasn't about getting rid of the exemption. And is there a way for us to do that so that we have the proper tools? I'm with the Soil and Water Conservation Districts and the Connecticut Council on Soil and Water Conservation. This is what we do. We do farm planning with the farmers, including, I know, with Mr. Jeremiah, with the Southwest Conservation District. So looking at, that, and I think that that's an important, so as we're looking at changing the Wetland Act, but is there other things we can do from an incentive perspective? Would it be the same piece of legislation or whatever? But I strongly recommend that we look at the incentives based approach that, as another tool for us, and particularly, like I said, expanding the work we did last year in the Connecticut Farm Bill.
Okay, we have Francis Pickering.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of responses. I think one of the issues we're seeing here is that, we're dealing with non-point source pollution, and that's pollution that comes from everybody, right? And so with point source pollution, it's very easy to point a finger at somebody. With non-point source, it's not that it's the farms or marine trades or golf courses or homes. It's actually all of the above in small amounts. And if we start carving out exemptions, then we really are going to risk the ultimate success of the endeavor. It's really something that we all have to share in. And by doing so, it makes the impact relatively minimal on any individual party. And with respect to farms, I think there are opportunities actually to make farming more viable by doing this. For instance, as I had mentioned after the meeting with Public Act 490, right now, we essentially tax or assess farmland at the same rate, whether it's in or out of production, right? The forestry part only applies to larger forest holdings. If we had a more nuanced one where we could reduce the assessments on land that is taken out of production for environmental benefits, that could actually provide farmers with additional income. So it could be potentially positive. And with respect to marine and other water users, absolutely access to the water is critical. But I think we have to keep in mind that low water quality, so water quantity and quality problems, also have adverse economic impacts on the viability of businesses and on property values, right? Nobody wants oyster beds where the oysters are inedible or where properties flood out. So there are economic benefits to this. It's really a balancing act, I think we have to consider. And then lastly, on the takings issue, takings are real when they eliminate any economic use of a property. But the courts have been pretty consistent that some degree of regulation is permissible. And what we're discussing here is much of a lighter touch than we see that is currently in place through local zoning, right? Local zoning sets pretty inviolable setbacks on most land uses that can take 25%, 50% of the area of a lot away from any economic use. I don't think any of us are talking about going anywhere near that. So if we do have concerns about potential regulatory takings, we need to put it into perspective and consider what's already on the books, and maybe look at addressing those which do not have an environmental benefit or public benefit as compared to what we're talking about today.
Francis, if you have suggested language on the incentives, can you send it in, please?
Yes. Well, obviously the legislature writes the language, but we'll send the concept in.
Okay, that'd be helpful. Then Representative Dubisky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of things. First off, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to the Connecticut Farm Bureau, and under Joe Nichols' leadership for many years, there are a number of publications that the Farm Bureau puts out, including best practices manuals with regard to things like manure management, with regard to zoning, and some others that really are helpful to farmers. Perhaps there could be some similar type of informational publications for others that border or access riparian areas, such as homeowners, such as landscaping companies, such as municipal entities, that could give them some better understanding of the best practices. It's not like most farmers don't know that you're not supposed to allow your manure to wash into the pond. So, these manuals with regard to farmers do exist. With regard to incentives, I am sure that any farmer in this state would be happy to see another program that they could apply to that would allow them to get some money to rejigger their manure storage facilities, or currently they may have their cows that walk through a stream to get from one field to another. Another program that would give them access to funds to perhaps put in culverts to allow the cows to go from one field to the other without walking through the stream. I'm sure they would be more than happy to have access to those extra dollars. But there are currently some programs at the state level. There are a number of them that are run by NRCS and the feds that do that as well. Unfortunately, all of them are, for better or worse, very bureaucratic. There's a lot of paperwork. There are a lot of requirements. Very often the farmers have to lay out the money in advance and be reimbursed, sometimes over time. So, I know there are quite a few farmers that would love to be able to take advantage of some of those programs, but simply can't afford to. And, maybe a program that is a little less bureaucratic and had a fewer strings attached might be an incentive to farmers to take advantage of those funds.
Thank you. Alicia.
As far as the agricultural exemptions go, farmers aren't the problem. They're not. It was there for a reason, right? Because we wanted farmers to be able to do what they need to do. It's the people that are taking advantage of that exemption that are a really big problem. That in some ways needs to be addressed. There is unfortunately, you talk to inland wetlands commissioners and they'll tell you that, there's the person that has a chicken and wants to do something on their land and wants to use the agricultural exemption. It gets taken advantage of. And so as far as that exemption goes, the farmers are the problem. And I don't think anybody said that for sure.
Okay. And then Joan, did you want to speak?
Yeah, told myself I'd stay in my lane and just talk about forestry, but since we're talking about farming, I can't help myself. In the attempt to get to our end goal here, which is to protect water quality in riparian areas, I want to make sure that we also understand there are already other laws that do that. For instance, the state right to farm law, which has been in place since 1981, addresses water pollution. If a farmer is basically doing something wrong, that again gets back to an earlier comment that somebody made. That's an enforcement issue. And that lies with the Department of Agriculture. And if somebody is doing something basically wrong that's negatively impacting water quality, under the state right to farm law, that should go to the Department of Ag. They're allowed to come out, do an inspection, and they do the due diligence, and then they look at whether the farmer is following generally accepted agricultural practices. So again, I don't want to get into a deep dive on that, but I just want to make sure that we are cognizant of the laws that are already there. And to an earlier comment, not always, but a lot of it, and I even see it in forestry operations, it becomes it's an enforcement issue. The laws are there, but they're not being enforced. And the other thing I'll just mention, and I happened to share this with Mary when we were in the cafeteria a little while ago, a friend of mine who just retired as the head forester for the Metropolitan District Commission, Carol Ewell, a phenomenal forester with a master's and a background in watershed quality, volunteers her time to the town of Glastonbury, and she worked with others to come up with the Diamond Lake Homeowners Guide to Lake-Friendly Living. And it's a phenomenal publication that she worked on. I'll pass it around, but I'd like it back, that she shared with me. And, things like this, that you can make an impact locally around your lake or the streams or the rivers in your towns, pop this into every mailbox. That gets to the homeowners. Whether they'll read it or not is another story, but it puts it in their face. And I'll pass it around, but I'd like it back. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just looking at my notes from last time. We had the equivalent of 17,000 football fields of riparian buffer loss between 1985 and 2023, based on the NOAA data. It's 35 square miles. So we're losing, if we say, well, let's just keep the law as it is, we're losing riparian buffer every year that we don't do something. So I just wanted people to understand that doing nothing means we'll continue to lose riparian buffer, which I think most everybody in here understands is a filtration device and helps water quality get better. So, the question for us really is, how do we prevent this slide and loss of buffer? Frank.
I was just going to ask, did you say from 1985 to now?
From 1985 to 2023, we lost 35 square miles, and they did this with the aerial surveys.
So that's almost 40 years, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
A loss of 25% of the buffer in the state. So that, concerns me for sure, and hopefully other people here that understand the value of the buffers. No one else? Okay. Are jumping around here. We're on D already, but I guess everyone just wants to make sure their issues are covered. What for DEEP resources dedicated to the program? did this group feel that Deep needed to be buttressed with another staffer? At least
Yeah, so.
Six.
six?
You know, I think making sure that DEP has the resources and staffing to take care of this. I think there were three things we talked about with DEP. We started out talking about just the training that needed to be done with commissioners, which isn't necessarily, you know, just for riparian buffers, but that was, you know, their lack of being able to do in-person training. And are there ways that we can look at that? I think we looked at then the idea of, you know, looking at regulations. And I think last time we had such a great explanation, and I just want to make sure we clarify that if we change the wetland regulation, we're not looking at new regulations. We're just going to update the model regulations. And I think that's a really big distinction. Asking DEP to come up with new regulations. No, I think that they're going to like go like, you know, we don't want to give everybody a heart attack, you know, Brian. So I think if we really make sure that it's like, oh, we're going to change this, and that, you know, we would expect them to then update the model regulations to reflect this. I think that that would be appropriate. So, and I think looking at it in those terms is important. I wanted to talk about the training just a little bit because it is in the Wetland Act, and I think it is one of the things we could talk about, how to do that. And, you know, the training is fall exclusively on them. It basically says that they have to do it online, and there's some challenges with online training. It sounds like it's beautiful. You develop this program, but when you spend a lot of money on a particular type of program like they did with the models, you know, with the different units, I should say, then anytime there is a change, now that's obsolete. So, and also one of the things we've heard loud and clear from folks who are on the wetland commissions, I know at Kakiewicz we've heard this expressed, is that the folks want you know, hands-on training, or, you know, where they're talking back and forth and there's a dialogue, because there's nuance, you know, and it's really hard to get the nuance in the training. And I think that's the you know, the beauty of, for example, the one-day major workshop that Kakiewicz has and whatever. So I think if we basically look at that and maybe look at doing the wetland training kind of the way the zoning model is, where wetland commissioners can fulfill those training obligations by taking courses from Clear, taking courses from Kakiewicz, taking courses other places, and don't put all of the burden on DEEP. I think that would, you know, serve us well. There's just so much opportunity out there. I mean, the classes that Clear is having would be excellent for, you know, any wetland commissioner to take. So that may be something we want to talk about. And that was something we discussed, was some of the challenges they have with the training piece of this.
I just want to make sure before we, Deep's got their hand up.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that you were okay with that if we recommended another teacher.
So I guess a couple of things in response to what Denise and others have said in terms of deep resources, and I guess I'll start with the training one. I mean, certainly we hear that there is a lot of interest in or need for more training generally for commissions and municipal staff, and certainly appreciate that. You know, we have the online training. We used to do more extensive training, hands-on field training, things like that, and had not had the resources to do that. I do think the suggestion of looking for ways to have other organizations, entities provide appropriate training is great. I don't think or I don't want Deep to be in a position of somehow having to certify that training. You know, certainly in terms of legal regulatory aspects of the training. I mean, we can we can talk about what our engagement with those other entities would be, but we don't want to be having to sort of say that's certified training, that's not certified training, these are certified trainers or not. So that's one item. In terms of general resources needed to support this effort, I think it depends on what that ends up looking like. Yes, updating model regulations is a much lighter lift than writing new regulations. So thank you, Denise, again for that. But yes, we do not have resources available right now to make significant additional effort. So I think we need to get closer to what this finally is going to look like to understand what that level of resource is. And some of the discussion about, training needs and other support needs have applied to the program in general and not specifically to the riparian buffers enhancements that may result from this working group. So I think we need to distinguish that as well.
Do we have an idea of if we're talking 1 or 2 people, or what are we talking?
Again, it's hard to say at this point, and depending on what this ends up looking like, I don't know if it's people or just budget to contract out to do something is also a possibility.
My co-chair.
I certainly think DEEP has a lot on its plate, and I'm a big fan of DEEP. But I ask that we keep it out of the consensus, that the additional staffing. I think that Brian didn't want to commit to anything. Speaking as a fiscal conservative, thank you.
Rick.
Thank you. First of all, yes, I quite agree. No, they can't do it for free, and it sounds like they don't have the resources to do this. But what I wanted to get back to was Denise's comments, actually. I think, first of all, I'm very supportive of that. And secondly, we already have a model for this. Planning and zoning. They have to have a certain number of hours. There's a frequency. The towns police it. They say, okay, they certify it. The Board of Selectmen or whatever the legislative body in town is given the list or the documents that say, okay, Joe Schmo did 6 hours or 4 hours or whatever's required on which and which date. And that model works. I'm also the chairman of planning and zoning, so I can tell you what works. My commissioners are all trained and they've all got the hours in that they need. There are a variety of sources. We've used the Connecticut Bar Association's courses. We've used CLEAR. All are good. And the nice thing is that they're all a little different. So you get a flavor from one, you get something from something else. It works well. It's inexpensive. And so I support Denise's suggestion.
All of a sudden, everybody's focused in. Yeah, William?
Sure, William Henley with Regional Water Authority and representing drinking water utilities. I just would like to make a comment. Based on our interactions with DEP, I would hate to ask them to do anything without authorizing additional staff or funding, just because we know that they're very, very short-staffed.
Yeah, we may lose our co-chair on that one, but I agree with you. I think, it's like imagination to think that they can handle another. Alicia.
I think that considering how our inland wetlands commissions feel about the needing more support from DEP, if we're not going to recommend that DEP needs more support to support our inland wetlands commissions, I don't think anybody has a right to say, wonder why we can't keep volunteer commissioners. Number two, one way to look at this, I suppose, sort of splitting the down the middle here, is for DEP to take a really, really close look. I think just flipped up. The duties of commissioners in the Inland Wetlands Act. and to give a very, very real assessment of what they need in order to be able to carry out their duties under the Inland Wetlands Act, because we're not going to be able to sustain this much longer, and putting all of the weight on our inland wetland commissioners without the resources from DEP.
Okay, any other comments on, William again, and then Joan?
Sure, and this might be relevant, but I know, Brian, you mentioned that you don't want to certify any training, but I know there are other programs that DEP administers, like the forestry program and the pesticide applicator program, and those are certified by DEEP. So is this just you're just adverse to adding any additional work to DEP, or do you have some specific issue with taking that on?
I think it is primarily the burden of adding a new program. I mean, that then requires, review of materials, and administrative, aspects of just running that sort of program. So yeah, that would be the concern.
Joan?
Yeah, sorry, Brian, I'm going to say this. I think education is key for commission members, absolutely. And if it takes more staffing at DEEP to do that, as somebody that's from the regulated community, one of the biggest problems I have encounter is not that I don't know what my job is or what I'm supposed to do, is that commission members don't. And I don't always fault them. They just have not been educated or have not been educated. So I think any additional support for staffing at DEEP is well worth it, and I think that money will go a long way in solving a lot of our problems. The other thing is, somebody just mentioned it, the Connecticut Forest Practices Act, which is in place since 1990s. I've had to go through continuing education credits for my DEEP certification for decades, and almost all of the credits that I get those courses are held by other trade organizations. We submit our agendas and content to DEEP Forestry. They look it over, make sure it is something that is suitable for continuing education credits, for professional development, etc. And so we can do our jobs better, especially when it comes to BMPs. And then DEEP approves those credits. So they're approving it, but they're not doing all the work to run the programs. The trade organizations and other groups are doing that. And I think personally that if you would have talked to at least DEEP Forestry, that's taken a huge amount of burden away from them, because when the law was first passed, everybody expected DEEP to also do all of the training we needed, and they quickly realized they didn't have the capacity to do that, and the trade organizations took it over. Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense, Joan, to farm it out like that.
Yeah, I'm guilty of doing common sense. Yeah.
That's why you got this appointment. 'Cause you're the common sense forester. Alan?
It's just to pick up on this discussion that Denise kindly started about training, and as someone who's worked in government for many years, I certainly understand Brian's concern of adding another burden. But following up a little bit with what you said, Joan, you're having another organization be involved, but also another simpler way would be during this coming session, maybe the Environment Committee could re-examine the bill that they approved the last session that requires training, and then just add some criteria, in the statutory language that would, have some minimum requirements that would save a lot of time, either if you as an agency are coerced into doing more of this, or if it's jobbed out to another organization. That would just help to find out, what are the minimum components of an additional training, which obviously is going to be, regardless of what comes out of our working group, there probably will be some change that will require, both modification of your online training as well as bringing in other additional training as well. So that might be just something for the working group to recommend back to the committee to look at as well. And then on another subject, since I have the mic for a second, as we're going through and talking about the value of these riparian areas, I noticed surprisingly, I think Denise and a few other people had mentioned this, but as well as Alicia, but what we may want to do that a lot of other New England states haven't done is not so much that this would be a regulatory component to the language, but just a way of emphasizing the value of these riparian areas, the incredible value they present in increasing resiliency to climate change, or if you want to just call it severe storms, that is becoming more and more recognized every year, including some events last summer in Connecticut, just to help promote an understanding of the value of what we're all doing here as a work group. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that because we've glossed over that point. I appreciate that.
Yeah, just quickly to add to that, the Governor's Council on Climate Change, they are working in natural lands reports. The one on wetlands talks very specifically about making sure that we acknowledge climate change, in the Wetlands Act. So just putting that out there, that's actually a recommendation from the Governor's Council on Climate Change report.
Okay, thank you. If we've beaten that one to death, we can now move to C, which is the implications of existing case law. And I kind of wish Janet was here today, but she is not a member, so oh, she is online? Okay. We're looking for her. No, don't see her, but what are some of the issues that were brought up by the attorneys regarding case law and how we would clarify the statutes to give the commissioners information that they can use to make a better judgment? Frank?
Well, I don't know that this was brought up by the attorneys, but we had discussed a little bit how we would define exactly riparian area, and in particular, if there's some kind of boundary, then where exactly, precisely does it start? Based on what? And I would think that it would have to have some criteria that a surveyor, a licensed surveyor, would be able to use consistently. Because if these matters come before a commission, you want accurate information. But secondly, if they go to court, you're going to need to say, okay, the riparian area starts here.
Mm-hmm.
And we have not defined anything like that. I don't know that we need to, but if we're going to consider any kind of a measurement-based thing, then absolutely we need to know where it starts.
Do you know if the other states are using a surveyor? Anybody know that? I don't either.
From what I've read, there is none.
Okay, but you think it'll be a problem in Connecticut if they say, leave that tree alone, it's inside the riparian buffer, there will be an argument?
Well, yeah, particularly if, let's say you have a measurement, whatever the measurement is, let's say it's 10 feet, hypothetically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get into a back and forth with the Inland Wetlands Commission, and what are they going to do?
Tape measure.
Well, tape measure, but
25
okay,
feet.
starting from where? So that's the issue. There are criteria that surveyors can use.
Okay.
I'm not one, but certainly, we could consult and see what their thoughts are.
Okay. Francis Pickering.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of the issues we talked about were having a legislative finding to, provide the framework for the Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Commissions to stand on, and also just the fact that currently they have to have, I think if I recall correctly, a specific adverse finding, and changing that to be a rebuttable presumption where the burden of proof is on the applicant, not on the commission, right? Because the science on this is pretty well established, and to force the commissions to have to go through the scientific record every time is really probably disproportionate.
Yeah, Janet went over that quite a bit, the rebuttable presumption. And I think Rep. Dubisky, you also commented on that, the rebuttable presumption.
I am, but I'm not sure how they would, now you're asking about the Connecticut Bar Association?
No,
Is-
no, your personal statement, I think you were coming down on the side of rebuttable presumption would fall on the applicant rather than having the town have to
Oh,
defend every time.
Right. I think that there are currently things that applicants have to establish to the satisfaction of the commission before an application is approved. Those requirements get more specific and more complicated if there is a special permit required based on zoning, based on a number of things there. A given application may require a special permit. But I don't think it would be a big leap to say that in the statutes that the applicant would also need to establish that it was not injuring the water quality or the because ultimately that's the goal. It's the water quality. We're using riparian areas as a protection of the water quality. Well, perhaps there may be in a given application there may be some other way to protect the water while still allowing access through the riparian area. So I think it would be reasonable to say to an applicant, all right, establish to the satisfaction of the commission and likely the commission's staff or engineer that this project is not going to have an adverse effect on the water.
Okay, so that would be a legislative change, which we could do. Are there other changes we should recommend? Alicia?
I think as far as the this item on the agenda, I think between Attorney Brooks and the attorney from DEP did a pretty good job of fleshing out the hurdles we would have in case law that already exist. And I do believe that the language from Attorney Brooks was sent around before the meeting, and I think it would probably be best to take a look at that to see how feasible it is, because it was pretty well thought out and responded to DEP's attorneys' suggestions and information.
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that because I agree with Alicia. I think both attorneys gave us some good things. And I think DEP's attorney said that this language was very doable to do the rebuttal presumption language. And I don't know if Janet took from this, but I do know that her recommendation or at least my notes say that she had thought that in the New Hampshire, there was some language that she thought could be incorporated that kind of addressed that rebuttal language. So anyway, that may be something we needed to look at and just see if Janet incorporated that. And Janet would probably be able to tell us if she looked at that or not, or if she came up with her own language. But I know the DEP attorney thought that there was some language from New Hampshire that could easily be incorporated to do that rebuttal. So.
Okay, so that, I think we have agreement in here on changing the rebuttable presumption. Okay. It should make the town's lives a little easier. Oh, Deep is gonna.
So, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, so Eliza, our attorney, was not available today. But yes, some of what, or it appears that what Attorney Brooks wrote here is at least conceptually in line with some of Eliza's thinking. I would want to take it back to her and have her, look at this and, offer any suggestions she might have, but we can certainly do that.
She just came online, so we can
She
ask her. We can ask her directly, Janet.
Oh, Janet.
I wanted to say the suggestion I particularly followed from Eliza's was importing language from the New Hampshire statute on legislative finding regarding the scientific value of vegetated areas. So that's what I put in. That's what I proposed and put it into the legislative finding 22A36. I in fact didn't. I didn't think of the rebuttable presumption. I had really been eager when at the end of the last meeting, Representative Dubitsky had mentioned, let's get some language, explicit language into the statute about that the burden of proof is, entirely on the applicant. And I really agreed with that, but I also didn't happen to put that in there. But I do agree with that. And if that wants to go in there, I hadn't thought about it as a rebuttable presumption, actually. But so that's all.
Okay, so just so I understand from my notes, you have two recommendations?
So I imported language for the scientific value. So establishing a legislative finding for the benefit of vegetated areas. And that's all in 22A36. And my other point was, well, it's a template. It's not, it's what a lawyer would draft. It is not the actual width from the varying water courses, and somebody else would have to both identify those types of water courses and the widths. And that's what I proposed. And I just threw it into something new called 22A-42A D3, subsection D, subsection 3. But but I agree with the concept of Representative Dubitsky of explicitly overruling Riverbend, where the agency had to establish actual adverse impact by putting it into the statute. And I'm not even sure I would call it a rebuttable presumption. I think I would just, it's what we always thought it was until the Riverbend case.
So what will we call it?
Sorry, I just came from another meeting. I don't have something to
That's okay.
call it right now, but we want something that says the actual adverse impact, the burden of proof remains entirely on the applicant.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I've got dog
that's
bark.
good enough. That's good enough. The attorneys will understand that, I think. Go ahead, save sound.
Yes, Charles Rothenberger subbing in for Bill Lucy today from Save the Sound. Yeah, I think it's also important that we keep in mind not opposed or arguing against the concepts that have been floated so far. Certain reasonable exceptions make a lot of sense and are probably necessary. I love putting the burden of proof on the applicant, but I think we also need to be cognizant of the impact of cumulative impacts. I think that's probably where the notion of riparian buffers generally began. To your statistic, Mary, the 25% of riparian area that we've lost over the 40 years, that didn't happen all at once. It was sort of, disappearance by 1,000 cuts, if you will. And, I just will note for the record the Diamond Lake homeowners brochure that was passed around, which is very helpful in terms of suggestions for homeowners along that water body. But it, also raises the tragedy of the commons issue, right? Because I can certainly see somebody flipping through that and it'd be, yeah, that would be great if all my neighbors did that, right? But, and if they do, then I don't necessarily have to. So, as long as whatever the final product is cognizant of cumulative impacts and protecting against sort of that long-term degradation as well. I just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other changes, legislative changes that the group would like to see to make life easier for the commissioners so they can make a decision on riparian buffer vegetation? William?
I know it was discussed how to come up with the metric of measurement. And I really like the language that they use in Massachusetts, which is from the mean high water line. They make any measurement of what that riparian buffer is going to be. I think it'd be a good concession to go with the median or the low water level would be fine with us. But that's how they do it in Massachusetts. And I think that's a good metric because some of the other states have more categorical approaches. And I think it's better to stick with something that's, as was mentioned, can be, measured in the field.
And how does that work in a dry season? Or is this a year-round median? What is it?
That's a good question. I don't know if that's defined.
Okay. I guess we can figure it out as we go. Oh, sorry. I forgot Joanne Shapiro, who is online.
Hi, thanks. So first I agree with the last few speakers. The burden of proof shifting would be massive help to the towns, and also that cumulative impact, which is why it's so important that the commissions not have to prove each time why the riparian buffer is necessary. And it's just very difficult to have that finding that each small encroachment on the riparian buffer is going to cause an adverse impact, but recognizing that it's the sum total. If everyone does it, that's the problem. But also my small but I think really critical edit to the proposed language from Attorney Brooks. I know that there's a concern and hesitation to establish vegetated buffer specific setbacks from wetlands, but to at least include wetlands into that statement added to 22A-36. Janet's proposed language starts the riparian areas of the water courses of the state and continue on to just simply insert wetlands and before water courses would at least give commissions that slight tool to also recognize that the riparian areas to a wetland are important. And maybe we don't go so far as to establish linear feet setbacks from the wetlands, but to at least give them that tool, because right now they're really powerless to deny an application for work grading buildings right up to the wetland edge. It's very difficult unless you can get an expert to testify that it will adversely impact the wetland. It's just a common sense thing for them to be able to point to that as some justification.
Okay, we'll have to think carefully about that because the group at the very beginning of our work, we focused on water courses.
I know a couple of us have been dissenting throughout and we're the minority, but it seems to me from the discussion I've heard that the real concern is that we'd be establishing some linear setback from those wetlands. So I'm backing off of that and just saying at least recognizing it's just a scientific statement of fact that those
the value of.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, we'll have to bat that around with the group here, but I'll add it, the value of the vegetation. Because you're saying the statutes are unclear.
Yeah, really the statute I find as a wetland agent leaves the commissions virtually powerless, except in the case of a very massive development where you can get an expert to say that removal of that vegetation by the wetland edge will have an adverse impact on the wetland, but those are few and far between. And the vast majority of situations are these smaller applications. You're not hiring an expert every time. And just like, having some common sense riparian area for a stream, and again, not saying one size fits all or giving a specific linear foot setback. But yeah, just establishing that as that presumption or that fact would be useful.
Okay, we'll have to see if we can write something that gives them a hint without a regulation. And then we'll have to bat that around at our next meeting. Rep. Dubitsky.
Thank you. Two quick things. First off, there's been a lot of discussion about the change in riparian areas since 1985. I understand that that's sort of back as far back as adequate measurements have gone, but I want to make sure that we don't take 1985 as some perfect time. Before that, there was far less vegetation. Back in the 1800s, most of the trees in the state were gone. So it's kind of been cyclical. It was forested, then it was not. Then it was forested, and some of it is not. So 1985 should not be looked at as, the perfect year. Also, I know we've all been looking to some extent at Attorney Brooks' suggestions, but I would suggest that what we have discussed today should be the basis, not what's in here. I have frankly not had a chance to go through all of this, but I do see some issues with some of her suggested language that I would be glad to discuss with her. But one of the things that we had sort of ostensibly agreed not to do is have a defined no-go zone. Well, in this language, there seems to be one. So I would suggest we start afresh, maybe look at Attorney Brooks' suggestions, but not base our proposal on what she's got here.
Yeah, I think Joanne heard all that and she was trying to get the language. She was trying to get vegetation in there for protection of wetlands without being specific about it. She knows there's a problem with changing wetlands law other than riparian in this task force. I think she's aware of that, and she was suggesting a compromise. William.
Sure. Yeah, I would just like some clarification from you, Representative, if you don't mind. You're defining this as a no-go zone, but all of the previous existing exemptions will remain, correct? Would it be appropriate to simply add an exemption, such as other states have, that allow for some maintenance of the riparian zone for aesthetic values, perhaps? Because that is not an existing exemption, correct?
Questions for you.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I'll give you an example of the no-go zone, and there seems to be sort of a conflict here. In section 22A-40 of Attorney Brooks's proposal, she adds to the exclusion from the exemption the removal of any vegetation, any native vegetation within 10 feet of any watercourse. So
That's not Attorney Brooks's. That was my proposal. I just want to correct you there.
I apologize. I thought this was Attorney Brooks's proposal.
There's a lot of paper flying around in the working group, so it's understandable.
Okay. Well, then I take back everything I said.
I'm going to try to respect the wishes of the group from the very beginning, which was we try to focus on watercourses. And if we can put a little more protection on vegetation for wetlands, we could suggest that, but we're mainly focusing on watercourses. Charles.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah. I guess I I'm a little confused as well. I thought the sort of foundation of what we're discussing were riparian buffers with certain predefined exceptions to that. So the concept of a 100-foot or 50-foot or whatever foot vegetated undisturbed buffer, barring any applicable exception, was sort of the foundation of where we were starting. And I think that goes to the cumulative impacts issue that I raised and somebody else mentioned. You know, it might be helpful actually. I know Deep Fisheries produced a paper which is in our record on this issue about the value of these vegetated buffer areas. It might be good to invite somebody from the Deep Fisheries Department to talk to us about that, because I think there is, you know, to to the extent of a earlier speaker, you know, some value to establishing the sort of ecological and scientific principle of the value that maintaining these buffers has on the protection of water quality in the state. So, thank you.
Okay, we're winding down, so we may or may not be able to do that, but we could try. Or maybe we could get them to phone it in from Zoom. Well, Bill, you're retired now, so you're not actually a fisheries, but did you have something to do with the report? Could you refer to it?
So yeah, I can refer to it. I think it's in everybody's reading material. I think everybody's had a chance to look at it. In many ways, I mean, every time a question comes up relative to, you know, what are some of the impacts and what's known and what isn't known in the scientific literature as to how well these impacts or potential impacts are understood, you know, this document provides information basically verifying that as of 20 years ago. And I think we've had some presentations also that have alluded to the additional information that's come forward since. I would argue that the document kind of stands on its own, and that if there are specific questions or needs for additional information on specific points in that document, we could reach out to the agency, and I'm sure that they would be more than willing to respond from some of their staff in fisheries, maybe with updated information. But I think even though it's a document that's was completed a number of years ago, I think it does a very good job of both characterizing any issues, the death by 1,000 cuts that has been mentioned many times, and the scientific basis for some of the concerns and the value of riparian buffers. And can I jump into something else, because I've been waiting as to if there was going to be any discussion today on the length and the size of those buffers. I know that in Janet's proposal, she identifies or gives leaves space for 3 different, you know, within XX width feet of the bank of A, and she leaves it blank. And I know, Alicia, that's in your proposal as well. You know, from the perspective of cold water streams, cold water resources, from the perspective of fishermen throughout the state, you know, it's recognized that the value of stream buffers is particularly particularly important in those watersheds that currently support cold water species that are currently still operating as a cold water ecosystem, and that those have preeminent importance, at least to this group of the population, the group that I represent. And so we would argue both for a substantial buffer in those cases, with the understanding that the exceptions that are in the current legislation and would be put forth in this revised modified legislation would stand. And we would also support the language that's in both what Janet Brooks proposed and Alicia, that allows for riparian areas of greater size be imposed on a case-by-case basis or adopted by municipal regulation where there is ecological support, the administrative record. And what I would mention that would support that type of allowance would be that some of the most important and most well-studied cold water streams and resources and watersheds in the state of Connecticut it's very clear that there are certain areas within those streams that are essential and need to be conserved in order for the entire stream and watershed to function in a proper manner, both for conserving cold water species, storing water supplies, cleaning up water, et cetera. So that type of provision that allows for special cases where greater protection would be afforded is particularly important.
Yeah, I was at another conference where they were talking about where the incoming stream is a cold water stream and affects the receiving stream. And that in that one area, you've got a reserve for the fish. And I could think of an example in that case where you might want a wider buffer to keep that reserve healthy. Janet.
Yes.
Fine.
I have found some language in the statute in the Environmental Policy Act, so for state agencies, that gives us the cumulative impact language. And I mean, yes, I could bore you and read it from there, that could be imported into the first factor for consideration in the Wetlands Act is environmental impact, and it could be enlarged to say environmental I'm just picking up the language from the Policy Act. Environmental consequences of the proposed action, including cumulative direct and indirect effects, which might result during and subsequent to the proposed action. I mean, that would be so easy language to import, and either I can send that in an email where that comes from, or I can say into the record now. It's from 22A-1B. That B is not in parens. Subsection C, number 2. And I thought that there's one thing that Representative Dubitsky might not want to throw out the baby with the bathwater in Alicia's draft. If you, Representative Dubitsky, look at the clarity that is brought into the agricultural exemption on road construction and farm buildings, this has been a bane of a number of us we can't get any clear ruling from the Supreme Court on it. And the wetlands commissions are just floundering all over the place on whether that is within the exemption or is not within the exemption. This language brings it clearly into the first sentence of the farming exemption. So anyway, you might consider that. And it is true that the language I propose essentially just allows the area to have a condition for natural vegetation. It's not a requirement. It's not an absolute. It's just that it provides the scientific basis by including it in the legislative finding in 22A36. So I'm happy to send an email to get that other language for the cumulative effect, if that's helpful.
Janet, is that because the natural condition is forest in Connecticut?
Sorry, is what? Something I just said?
Yeah, you're trying to give some tools to the commissioner. Are you referring to the natural condition along streams in Connecticut because of our climate and location and so on? Is vegetated?
Is vegetated, right? I actually took out from New Hampshire wooded because I don't think that I didn't hear people talking about that what we're looking for 100% around the state along all watercourses is a wooded vegetated area. It can be wooded, it can include trees, but I thought I heard some members talking about that some vegetation might even be lower shrubs.
Yeah, they did. That would be a modern compromise. If you can't have a forest there, can you have something else that will filter?
So that's why I did not adopt the language from the New Hampshire statute, which was saying that for wooded, what I think they called it, wooded buffer areas. I used whatever I used, vegetated. areas. Vegetated areas around watercourses.
Okay. Frank.
One of the things I don't know that later in my second section, not in the legislative finding, I refer to perennial watercourses, and I don't know whether folks. I don't particularly know why I added that, but I'm not sure. So I don't know enough about the science to know whether the intermittent water courses need the same protection.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say that I do trust in Bill's assessment of the various needs for different types of streams, cold water versus other streams and so forth. However, from an enforcement standpoint, this becomes difficult. From a applicant coming in and, the commission may feel it's one type of stream, the applicant may feel it's another. We're going to go back and forth and play that game. I would prefer if this is going to have some measurement, that it not be reliant on the particular type of water quality and the water needs, what's beneficial. Even though I agree that that is true, I just think it creates a level of complexity that is going to be difficult to manage. Thank you.
So you're looking at all streams? So they don't have to prove it's this or it's that? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, because we're not, listen, I don't know because I'm looking at draft language, but if the thought is, okay, we're going to have such and such a distance for cold water and such a distance for another one. There is no case where there is no buffer. That hasn't been laid out, that if it's not A, B, or C, then you can do whatever you want. And I don't expect that would happen. What I'm saying is when you start trying to break it into water types, and that's debatable, that's the problem. So I would prefer if there was going to be something like this, a measurement that was perhaps not as strong as it could be for the strongest one, but not as weak as the weakest one, something that can be applied simply, rather than sitting here and saying we're going to interpret, or we're going to hire somebody to interpret whether the stream is X, Y, or Z type. And Bill has more information on this, I'm sure. It may be that they are defined somewhere, but we have to adopt that definition.
Yeah, so in another life, I was privileged to be able to participate in a statewide stream survey that the DEP undertook from the very late 1980s to the mid 1990s into thousands of streams throughout the state. And I think that forms the basis of something that's now maintained since I retired. And so DEP has a cold water stream habitat map, if I'm remembering it correctly. I think that identifies most or all of those resources. So I don't know if that answers your concern, but if the agency had something that specifically delineated which resources fell under that umbrella, might that make the regulation more practical?
Well, it would certainly make it easier to apply. I don't know if Brian knows if that document still exists, isn't maintained, and then of course we would have to refer to it, reference it, that's the criteria we're concerned.
Want to weigh in?
I don't know that it exists or doesn't exist. I would have to go back to our fisheries folks and
Alicia?
There is a cold water habitat map and language that Bill Lucy and I had worked on at the end of the session references that. But I have talked to Mary Becker a little bit about it. And I think that there are some things she kind of wanted to kind of understand how it would be used so that, it could be, whether it could be clear enough to the inland wetlands commissions. But another area that warrants greater protection as well, and I think Bill can probably agree, is drinking water watersheds, which are all very well delineated by the Department of Public Health, and a very detailed map exists on the Department of Public Health's website. I also just want to say, I think it would be beneficial because we're talking about a lot of concepts, And I feel like there is, when you don't have things in, when you're not looking at things in writing, it gets very difficult to sort of understand implications and understand context. So I think it would be definitely beneficial to look at various proposals for the next meeting. I know mine had some errors in it, as Undersecretary Heft just pointed out. And I've kind of worked through those, and I will be resubmitting. So don't just take what I sent out before this meeting as a grain of salt. It was not, it's something, I'm a very strong proponent of having something in writing for people to react to. Because otherwise we just sit here and talk in circles.
No, we're gonna hopefully have a written document for next week. And then we'll actually plunge in and tinker with it. Are your errors in the map, or are they in a text?
I'm sorry?
The errors you referred to, are they in a map or in a text?
They were in just some errors, consistency errors in what I had sent around in my proposal
Okay.
yesterday. But I'm sending out a second version that'll make a little bit more sense.
Okay. Representative Anderson.
So for the sake of discussion, I had bounced off some members that, for going back to the beginning, we didn't want to bite off more than we can chew, which happened last year with the initial bill, that we consider named rivers and streams. Named rivers, there aren't that many. Now I just heard there's a statewide stream survey and a cold water habitat survey. Just making my experience with constituents and dealing with their inland wetlands. One person wants to put up a shed and they said it was too close to his neighbor. And then the building inspector shows up and within a week, there's a whole new wetland to find on his property. It gets very open-ended. So just for the sake of discussion, not that I'm firm on this, there may be thousands of perennial water courses in this state, but I did a quick look at one of my 4 towns, Granby. There probably only are a half dozen that are named. And we're very blessed. One of those are East and West Branch of the Salmon Brook, which are federally recognized. But for the sake of the private property owners, we could delegate some of this to the towns. But I would consider defining these clearly, what we're protecting. Thanks.
I do a lot of field work in my other job, and I do run into unnamed streams. Unfortunately, some of them are pretty big too, but they're unnamed. So not crazy about that idea, but delegating to the municipality makes a lot of sense because they're in the field too, and they know. Alicia.
The Inland Wetlands Commissions have already been, they're already working under the definition of water courses. And under the definition of water courses, vernal pools and intermittent streams exist there. So I think that adding something, because you could make the case of, well, unnamed streams under what map, right? Because you look at Google, and Google has a lot of unnamed streams. You look at DEP's mappings, and you may find some streams that are unnamed there. You look at CT Eco, you may find some streams that are unnamed there, and then you can have Uncle Bart, who's lived, on this little stream for, his family's been on it for 150 years and have called it the Smith Stream, and he will say that is a named stream. So I think it would add some complexity because our inland wetlands commissions have already been dealing with the definitions under the Inland Wetlands Act at this point. Now, whether you wanted to, tease out some other things from there, I think it would add complexity. But the definition of water courses already exists in the Inland Wetlands Act.
I think we can move on to D, or maybe we're there already. This is where we have to separate out what we recommend deep do on regulations. For example, we could have them do recommended buffer widths for certain categories that have maps that can be useful to the towns. And then what would be legislative recommendations? And how do we incorporate buffer protections, whether it be by law or by regulation? So if we can talk about that for a bit. Rep. Dubitsky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that if we, for example, made it put the burden on an applicant to establish that their project was not having an adverse effect on the water quality, we could then give the responsibility to DEEP to establish the technical standards and the regulations under which that designation would be determined. It would be difficult or close to impossible for us to put those standards into statute. And they may be different based on the different types of watercourses. There may be differences in how a given watercourse would respond to a given project. So I really think that would be a deep function to establish those technical standards, and also to perhaps provide some training to the wetland commissions as to how to view an application against those standards, and to determine whether or not the application meets them or does not meet them. You know, perhaps in statute, we could have something, we could have a procedure that the applicant would have to go through, the steps that they would have to take to identify certain aspects of the standards that they meet or don't meet, and what to do then. But we also need to give the commissions, the municipal commissions, not only some instruction, but some discretion to apply those standards that DEEP creates, to apply them to the given situation that's in their town.
That makes a lot of sense to me. What does the group think? With the technical on deep, with the procedure outlines in the statute? No. Rep. D'Amico?
Isn't that traditionally how it's been done?
Yep.
Up until now?
Yep.
So
Makes sense.
why would we change that? Yeah.
Makes sense. Alicia?
But are we going to do that and not recommend additional resources to DEV? Just putting that out there.
No, the only one that's a no on that is my colleague here, but we could,
They haven't asked for additional resources.
that's true.
Which they always have a right to do.
Right. And we can also say within available appropriations, which means they have to change their priorities. So that's another way we could do it. Deep.
I'm just trying to envision what technical standards look like. in this situation. Uh, it could be a fairly complex undertaking. I don't know. I'd have to go back and talk more with some of the experts on exactly what kind of criteria. I think it may be possible to build it into statutory language, but I think I'd want to get some other opinions on it.
Yeah, well, if you would run that by your team, that would be good. For some of the suggestions we got last meeting were, or when Clear was here, they said really depends on the uses and the slope. The small corridors, they were recommending 25 to 50 feet. Larger corridors, at least 50 feet. And then if it's in a cold water stream or a reservoir, you want additional protection. If you're in an urban area, she's not here today, but the urban watersheds really don't have that much room. And by necessity, it's going to be narrow.
Right. So what you're talking about, I think, is how standards for determining what the appropriate buffer width is. I think what Representative Dubitsky was suggesting was technical standards and criteria for assessing what adverse impacts are. Was I hearing that correctly? Okay.
Representative Mashinsky, if I may, we're talking about riparian buffers. It's part of the Long Island Sound program as well. They just adopted new goals that includes establishing riparian buffers along most of the streams in Connecticut. One of the things we're looking at there is a guideline booklet that was put out by Chesapeake Bay. It's called the Chesapeake Bay Riparian Handbook, a guide for establishing and maintaining riparian buffers. We're going to be looking at that as a guide and see if it could be adopted for Connecticut. So I just wanted to put that out there as a resource that's existing. And we're not looking to reinvent the wheel with the Long Island Sound program. And we probably don't need to reinvent the wheel here since that guidebook is already in place. I can send the link to that people can take a look at.
That would be terrific. We're like them, we're a large basin, constricted. You know, there's one opening at one end, the other end gets worse and worse, and and a big population. And it's a very similar situation. So if they've already done it, we should definitely borrow from them. Frank.
Well, I'm not sure, you know, obviously we're still working on drafts, but the numbers I'm hearing seem really large. So let's think about a property maybe on Lake Hayward or the Connecticut River. Are we suggesting that they not be able to touch the area that is, let's just say, 100 feet from the river?
No, if Hayward is not a public drinking water reservoir, it wouldn't be 100 feet.
Oh,
more likely to be 25 to 50.
Because I mean, some of those lots are not that big to begin with.
Right.
I think we need to be mindful of the numbers that we use obviously for drinking water. It would be more depending on the class of reservoir. I think there's multiple classes, right? And if it's a Class C reservoir, it's probably not even being used for drinking water. Nevertheless, I just think we need to be mindful of these dimensions because in a lot of cases, these are small lots along a stream, along a river, along a pond. And when we say we're talking about 25, 50, 100 feet, that's a big piece of their land. And there may be a house right there.
Yeah, no, it's more likely to be 25 in an existing developed area. But in some cases, we're going to want to go to 100 if it's a sensitive area. Upstream of a reservoir is it a sensitive area? You know, and also it's better to prevent the material from getting into the water than trying to build an expensive treatment plant later or take it out. Alicia.
So I think we just need a shift in thinking here. No one is proposing that width is a no-touch zone. It is the way that we regulate things here in Connecticut is we were regulating the activity, right? And we are not saying that, no, absolutely you can't touch that. We're saying that if you're going to touch that in that area, your local inland wetlands commission can look at it and say, you know what, leave 10 feet, that's sufficient. Or if it's in a drinking water watershed, but it's a really steep slope, we really don't want people paving a steep slope in a drinking water watershed that could really impact a drinking water reservoir, which, by the way, again, mapped by DPH, and the classes of reservoirs don't have anything to do with this, but we're not talking about no touch zones. We are talking about regulating that activity so that the commissions can impose proper protections for the vegetation along our waterways. That's what we're talking about.
If you have the, maybe you already sent it in, I didn't see it, but if you have the Chesapeake Bay information, or if anyone has it, that would be
I
good.
just sent the link around to folks.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. We have an extensive library for this working group. It's pretty impressive. Rip Tavitsky.
Thank you. And I agree with Alicia that we're not talking about a no touch zone. We're talking about an area where there's sort of a rebuttable presumption. And there may be a project, like let's say I want to put in a boat dock, and there's vegetation all over the place, and it's in an urban area. Well, I may be able to clear a parking lot and put in native vegetation in one area that's 100 acres worth of vegetation, and all I want to do is take up 100 feet of the riverbank for my boat dock. Well, that may actually make the water cleaner. So we need to be able to have some basic standards, have a rebuttable presumption, so I can go into the Wetland Commission and say, look at all of the paved area that I'm going to get rid of. And my project, although it does take up 100 feet of riverfront because I'm putting in a boat dock, it's going to, in gross, it's going to clean the water more because there'll be less paved area, less impervious surface. So we can't have something that says, 10 feet, 25 feet, 50 feet, that's it, you can't go there. Because in my example, I'm actually cleaning the water because I'm making it better. And if I can't do that, if I can't get near the water, then I can't do my project. I can't make the water cleaner. I can't get rid of that paved area. So we need to make sure that there's that flexibility as well.
You're right. And I'm thinking of that area in Weathersfield that's all paved, in Weathersfield Cove where it's all paved there. It's all been removed. So that one section has no protection for the river, but it's accessible for unloading your boats. And you're saying we can trade one for another in some cases. So Bill Hyatt's been patiently waiting.
Yeah, just want to add, we were talking a couple of minutes ago about the cold water stream habitat map. I just emailed Casey a link to the department's description of that resource, and it's got links to it. So it's a good informational source on that piece. And then just reference to what Representative Dubitsky just said, absolutely would support anything that allows the flexibility for conditions to be improved. Would never want to get in the way of that.
maybe the Park River people can get rid of that parking lot that's right on the floodplain that they were talking about when they were here. So,
I just want to add quickly that the wetland agencies or commissions, do this regularly, not necessarily on riparian areas, but, a lot of times we have a property where they have to cross a stream to get to the property, or there's no access to the upland areas. So this isn't new. This is something that they deal with all the time. They have to make these judgment calls. They're not going to deny someone access to their property. That never happens. So I think that this is a great approach to take.
amazingly enough, it sounds like we are in agreement, at least verbally. And we'll write this up, try to vote on it next time if we can. If we have a big fight erupting, we may have to have one more meeting, but I'm hoping to wrap this up next week. Yes, Charles.
Excuse me, I know best laid plans, but I think it'd be really helpful to get any language in advance of next meeting, so folks have time to noodle on it and come with fully formed thoughts and suggestions.
Yep. So that means no weekend, just writing. Understood. Thank you very much for your suggestion. Anything else for the recommendations before we adjourn for today? I'm really impressed by the way this group is moving in the direction of practical consensus. It's very helpful. Thank you very much for all your cooperation. Oh, of course.
So this is my first working group, and we have 24 members and some alternates. So this is partly for our clerk and to avoid misunderstandings. So there should be only 24 voting, and I don't know if the alternates are appointed, formally. So I don't want any misunderstanding who can vote, who can't. Just so we know ahead of time next week. We don't have to answer that now, but
We could do is call by your appointment rather than the name, because sometimes there's more than one person who has been showing up, and we will just have one person for per the appointments as the statutes were written. So if we use that list,
I forgot who cut the appointment. Who did the letters?
well, they went out from
Can we let
Casey's.
Casey answer?
Yeah, they went out from Casey's office. Casey.
So yeah, just to jump in here, we didn't have formal appointment letters, but I did contact everyone, I think, if I remember correctly, going back as to who was appointed. Some people, with the chair's permission, had nominated representatives in their stead. And then because of the meeting schedule and everyone else's schedules, we have had alternates fill in. So what I've done, I'm working on the membership list at long last, and I'll send that around as a draft beforehand to everybody. And we can all review if you want to add a title or whatever organization you're representing. And then we can determine from there who the voting members are. If there's some folks I know have been filling in, or if there are those that are, technically appointed. There were a couple that were appointed and those I've listed, but if there are any changes, feel free to let me or the chairs know. Thank you.
So can we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
Okay, and we're going to meet again on the 10th at 10 o'clock. Okay, thank you everyone for
Thank you.
coming in.